Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I want to start with FDR and a speech that he gave that's not terribly well known in Madison Square Garden in New York and on January 11th, 1944. It's called the Economic Bill of Rights. And one of the rights that FDR outlined is the right to adequate medical care and opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. Looking back on that, some more than 6 decades later, it's rather an amazing statement from an American president.
Well, it should shame us as Americans because Western Europe, Canada have universal health insurance. Nobody dies in Canada or Belgium or France or Germany because they don't have health insurance. They're insured from the minute they're born. Where in this country, according to the Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences, a little-known report came out recently that said an estimated 18,000 Americans die every year because they can't afford health insurance, not just can't afford health care for their ailments. And that's 6 9/11s every year. The Urban Institute put it at 22,000 Americans who die every year because they can't afford health insurance. Now, why do countries in Western Europe of much smaller wealth have it and we don't? That's really a very important question to ask. And I try to answer it this way. In Western Europe, they had a multi-party system, so they had proportional representation. So a smaller party could leverage a larger party as part of the governing coalition, the way the Green Party leveraged the Social Democratic Party on environmental issues in Germany recent years. They worked through their trade unions. Trade unions are far larger and more vibrant as a proportion of the workforce in Western Europe than the United States. They had cooperatives, big cooperatives in Switzerland and Sweden, in Germany, housing cooperatives and food cooperatives. They worked through them, and they got it. They got paid maternity leave. They got universal daycare. They got full health care. They got home health care that would be the envy of Americans. We have lost our intermediate democratic institutions. They've become very weak. We hardly have any cooperatives other than farm co-ops. The labor unions have been retrenching and shrinking. Look at the United Auto Workers and the United Steel Workers. And we have a two-party duopoly that forces people through a winner-take-all electoral college system and a gerrymandered district system into often just having one choice, the incumbent. Or at the presidential level, people go to the polls for the least worst choice. And once they do that, they're signaling to the least worst, whether it's the Democratic or the Republican nominee, that they have nowhere to go. So they lose their bargaining power, and there are so many obstructions to third parties in our country. No country in the Western world comes close to obstructing voters and obstructing third-party candidates.
It's something you've had personal experience dealing with,
yes,
going up all those regulations. And in each state, it's very different, isn't it?
Incredible. 50 different state laws, rules, regulations, trapdoors, county differences for running for federal office. If you run for Congress, you run for the White House, you should have one federal ballot access law that you have to meet. And it should not be 70,000 signatures in Texas, and you have to double it because they disqualify. The state officials love to disqualify on an arbitrary basis thousands of signatures. 70,000 in North Carolina. In Little Oklahoma, 44,000 signatures. Often in just a few weeks, your signature gatherers are harassed on the street. You're sued by the Democratic Party, as we were 24 times in 18 states in 12 weeks in 2004. We won most of them, but they were suing us to drain us and to divert us, distract us.
Now, on the issue of single-payer health care, why do you say that only government can do it?
Because single-payer means that there's one insurer. Medicare is really started out as a single-payer system. It had some gaps, and it's being undermined by this Medicare Advantage, where private companies lure elderly people into their Medicare Advantage with a taxpayer subsidy of 13 cents per dollar, by the way. That's undermining Medicare. So in its purer form, Medicare was a single-payer system. And what we're talking about is complete Medicare for everybody. Everybody in, nobody out. That means you don't have to spend, as a society or insurance companies, spend a lot of our money trying to figure out who they're going to deny health care to, who they're going to exclude, and all the other little deductions and evasions that people, even people who have health insurance, have to experience. 50 million people don't have any health insurance in this country. Another 50 are underinsured, and the others have all these exclusions and deductions and pre-existing conditions. It's maddening, and the billing practices are maddening, and figuring out the bills. Whereas in a place like Canada, you never see a bill. It's already paid under the Canadian Medicare system. So you need to have government insurance, because you can't have one corporate monopoly insurance company. We have to have government insurance whose purpose is service, not profit.
As soon as you say government involvement, then you can hear the echo machine of it's Big Brother out of Orwell, it's socialism, it's the oppressive state, undermining the individual rights of Americans to choose.
Now, that's often said by people who are taking government insurance money. Like Medicare, for example. The government already pays half of the $2.2 trillion cost of so-called health care in the United States a year. But they don't have any controls. They pay for you not to have your free choice of doctor and hospital. The great thing about single payer is, unlike HMOs, unlike Aetna, unlike these private insurance companies, you have your free choice of doctor and hospital, as they do in Canada, where you're not told to go to a certain clinic, a certain doctor, a certain hospital, the way tens of millions of Americans are told. So that's a lot more freedom. So the real restrictions are corporate socialism, corporate domination. And you can't diselect any of these corporate executives.
When Americans find out about single payer and the kind of advantages of the system and how people benefit in Europe and Canada and Japan and elsewhere, they're rather in large numbers in favor of it.
Yes.
Yet that doesn't seem to find any political traction in Washington. Why not?
That shows how weak our democracy is. A majority of the American people again and again have declared their support for single payer. First of all, it will save about $350 billion in administrative expenses. Medicare expenses is 3% administrative expenses. Aetna is up to 30%. It takes a lot of expenses to keep denying people and telling them what they can and cannot get in terms of health care. That's why these health insurance companies are so inefficient from that point of view. Then there's about at least $220 billion in billing fraud and abuse. So you have over $500 billion to apply to health care delivery, to covering people who aren't covered if you have a single payer system. So why is it, in response to your question, David, why is it that a majority of doctors are for single payer, 59% in a poll in April 2008, a majority of nurses, even larger, are for single payer, a majority of the American people are for single payer, but 535 members of Congress can't muster a majority for single payer against the HMO, drug company, and health insurance lobbies that are swarming over Capitol Hill and literally spending hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbying. The drug industry has about one full-time lobbyist for every member of Congress. A lot of money is at stake. And the reason why is this public opinion is just opinion. It is not organized. It doesn't march. It doesn't demonstrate. It doesn't collar their senators and representatives in auditoriums for accountability sessions. So here's this majoritarian reform is off the table. Obama's not considering it. Pelosi, Reid, the Democratic heads of the House and Senate are not considering it. And when Obama had his confab in the White House a few weeks ago, 120 people on health care reform, he didn't even invite one single-payer advocate until a reporter blew the whistle and they finally invited John Conyers. Now, John Conyers is sponsoring H.R. 676. Remember that, 676, and if you want a copy. And that's a single-payer, and there are about 70 members of the House already on board. But they're not really fighting for it because Obama has basically said, forget it, Pelosi has said, forget it. Senator Reid has said, forget it. It's not on the table. I mean, this is really crazy. Who is this country for? Is it for a few of these giant health insurance company gougers, these drug companies that charge people through the nose for drugs that are developed and tested and discovered by the taxpayer, very often through the National Institutes of Health, like Taxol and AZT? Or is the government for the people? And that's what we have to really get down to brass tacks. Lots of people lose their relatives and their friends, and so much agony and anguish because they can't get health care and they die as a result, or their injuries aren't treated, or their sickness worsens because it's not treated. And those are the people that really have a burning desire, I think, to organize. But they have to start. And I think the spark started in West Virginia a few weeks ago. And you can check out the website, singlepayeraction.org, singlepayeraction.org. They're doing demonstrative statements on the sidewalks. They burned their health bills before the health insurance lobby in Washington, the building in Washington, on the outside, on the sidewalk. I mean, they're really doing it in the old civil rights labor movement way.
Let's talk about the economic crisis, which is often compared to the Great Depression. The litany of adjectives used to describe it is because of greed, incompetence, the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999 under the Clinton administration. The subprime mortgages, in particular, are singled out as one of the main factors. Is there anything missing here? Is anyone talking about the system that produces these outcomes in terms of actual restructuring?
Yes, I mean, we had the biggest and only mass rally in front of the New York Stock Exchange last October. Wasn't widely reported as part of our presidential campaign with me and Matt Gonzalez and others speaking. And basically the point I made was that investment has become more abstract, more speculative, more risky in order to get higher profits, in order to inflate the stock of Goldman Sachs and Citigroup and Bank of America, in order to make these executives incredibly rich, bringing home $50, $60 million a year, for example. And the government does not regulate. And unfortunately, these corporations are not using their money. They're using other people's money. They're using the trillions of dollars, the worker pension money, the mutual money, savings, mutual fund, savers' money. And they have seriously broken any fiduciary responsibility, looting or draining trillions of dollars in the last few years of people's lifetime savings. Now, this should never have been allowed. Clinton and Robert Rubin, Secretary of Treasury, and Larry Summers, who succeeded him in 1999-2000, they got through legislation which we fought aggressively, and we were right, which deregulated the banks, allowed the banks and the security companies to merge in a conflict of interest that Franklin Delano Roosevelt prohibited for obvious reasons, and then also they refused to regulate these derivatives, these collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, structured investment vehicles. All this is gambling. That's what it is. The best way to describe it is the following: using your money to bet on bets on debt on debt. And AIG is the monster, poster child, already $175 billion. That's, by the way, over 17 years of the budget of the Environmental Protection Administration, just there. And the money's being handed out because AIG had a PowerPoint presentation a few weeks ago in Washington to justify their bailout by saying, if we are allowed to sink, we'll bring the world economy down with us. Now, why do we ever allow a company to be that big and too big to fail? A company ridden with great crazed speculation, where they can bring down towns in Norway, municipalities in Norway, pension funds in our country, all over the world. And they laid it out themselves. I wrote an article on it. It's on commondreams.org, as my weekly column is. And it's just amazing that the Obama administration, never mind the Bush administration, has not said, we are going to have an antitrust policy where we're going to break up these companies and they will never again be too big to fail because some other bank or other insurance company will be able to take their place. So what we have here is a spectacular implosion of casino capitalism, which translates into a corporate government where their own executives who've tanked their own companies have their surrogates become Secretary of the Treasury and economic advisors to Obama and in other very important places. So where are we now? We are in a situation where we have either state capitalism or corporate socialism. You can pick your phrase. Corporate capitalism is not capitalism. Capitalism is a business where if you don't make it, you sink and you go out of business. It's a business where you're not bailed out by the taxpayer. It's a business where you don't have such political power in Washington, where you can turn the tax system, the subsidy system in your favor because you're big and powerful in Washington against your own smaller competitors. So let's make that key distinction. This is corporate capitalism. It is not capitalism.
You must have seen this Newsweek
yes.
cover story, "We are all socialists now." Are we?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is this. Socialism is saving capitalism. Washington is saving Wall Street. But there's another stage that's emerging. And at the demonstration in Wall Street, we had a huge banner, "Socialism saves capitalism." Here's what's happening, David, is indeed $12 trillion in a variety of disbursements, loans, and obligations have already been put on Wall Street's table to save it. Well, now Wall Street, mainly this corporate capitalism, may sink socialism, with these massive mega Goliath deficits that are going to be on the backs of present and future generations of America to pay for this corporate crime wave that has destabilized our economy, unemployed millions of workers, impoverished consumers further, and destabilized the world economy. Now, how many of these guys are going to jail? How many demonstrations are they that shout jail time, not bailout time? We haven't seen it yet. We've seen these right-wing demonstrations recently on tax day, April 15th, where it was like using 40-year-old language. They were attacking government spending. They never mentioned corporations, never mentioned Goldman Sachs, Citibank, the bailouts, the $1 trillion bailouts. It's as if government has a life of its own instead of being a reactive institution to the greatest power impinging and coming on it and swarming over it, which is corporate power, unfortunately.
Why does Obama seem to be dedicated to restoring the status quo ante? You have his Treasury Secretary, Tim Geithner, saying, who, as you mentioned, is like Larry Summers, a protege of Robert Rubin. Geithner said, "We have a financial system that is run by private shareholders, managed by private institutions, and we'd like to continue to do that."
Well, Obama's scared. I mean, most presidents would be scared because if he makes a move that is not approved by Wall Street, they can bring down the economy. And then people will blame him. They won't blame Wall Street. They'll blame him, the Democratic Party. So number one, he's scared. Number two, we don't have an alternative model of economic activity. It's all the big corporation. So it's not like he can say, okay, let's go to credit unions. They're not big enough. However, I would urge him to start saying, how come not one out of 8,000 credit unions, which are cooperatives, failed? Not one has failed. And all the credit unions in the country have assets equivalent to Citigroup. Citigroup has failed. It's really bankrupt. It's insolvent. It's only being saved by the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve. Now, it's amazing where we have a working model that you can put your savings in. You can have a checking account. You can get an auto loan, you can get a home loan, you can get a small business loan from these credit unions all over the country. And there's no reference by the Obama administration to them. It's really extraordinary. But so one, Obama's scared. Two, he doesn't seem to find any other model that can take up the slack of these crooks on Wall Street. And three, they give him cover. You say, hey, don't blame me. I put in Larry Summers. I'm listening to Robert Rubin. I'm listening to Alan Greenspan. I'm listening to Timothy Guenther and Paul Volcker and so forth. So if it goes wrong, he can say, don't blame me. I put Wall Street in charge, and they brought you down, if he ever dares to even use those kinds of phrases. The final thing about Obama, and you can see that in his campaign, is he doesn't like conflict. He doesn't like to take on power. He doesn't like, never mind speak truth to power, he doesn't like to take on power. That's why he talks about we are one people, we are one nation. Well, he should have said we are one people, we are one nation against domination by corporations who are not sanctioned by the Constitution at all to expand and insinuate their power and control over people's lives. So, this is a troubling personality trait for Obama, that he doesn't like power. And the people who put him in office, represented so much by all the citizen groups in Washington, like Sierra Club and Common Cause and Public Citizen, ACLU, he won't meet with their leaders. I've urged him in a letter which is on nader.org, to get together in a hotel ballroom the way Jimmy Carter did, 1,000 leaders of citizen groups that have millions of dues-paying members all over the country, anti-poverty groups, labor groups. He won't, because he knows they have nowhere to go. He doesn't have to pay attention to them. Instead, he meets with the corporate chieftains. He meets with right-wing commentators like George Will and Krauthammer and so on. That's a very, very undesirable personality trait.
He doesn't seem to be listening either to two American Nobel Prize winners in economics,
Yes.
Stiglitz and Krugman. For example, Krugman has called this rescue plan cash for trash, and Joseph Stiglitz has called it the robbery of the American people. Why aren't they in the conversation?
Well, again, you see, they don't represent the Wall Street consensus. They don't represent the Wall Street consensus, David. They are aberrants. They are dissenters. And unfortunately, I think they're right. It's not going to work. Even with the expenditure of all this money, it's not going to work, as Obama says and Larry Summers said they think it's going to work. It may paper over things for a while, but we're in, I think, for a long, severe recession, if not depression. But here you have two Nobel Prize-winning economists. Have they been invited to talk with Obama in the White House? Not at all. You see, he cannot deal with this kind of powerful dissent. He's got to go with the corporate flow. That's his key Achilles heel as president. You have to look at the personality and the character of presidents, not just their record.
Years ago, you studied Chinese at Princeton, and the Chinese character for crisis has two components. One is danger, which is obvious, but the other is opportunity. Wouldn't this economic crisis really present a tremendous opportunity to radically restructure and reform the American economy?
Yes, I've written about that. For example, it can engage in a very fundamental re-regulation of the financial industry, which puts more power in the hands of investors. You see, if the shareholders controlled their companies, which they don't under our laws, they're told either if you don't like management, sell your shares. If they controlled their companies, they would never have allowed these reckless investments, never allowed this excessive executive compensation that in effect induced the companies to engage in reckless investments, because reckless investments engage high profits. You go out on a limb and you think you're going to succeed with these speculative derivatives, you get a tremendous profit and rolling over again and again. You know how many dollars were transacted in derivatives last year? $500 trillion. And that's why, in response to your question, a great opportunity to tax these derivative speculative instruments. A 1/10% tax. Never mind a 6% sales tax that millions of Americans have to pay when they go into stores for their necessities of life. 1/10% would bring in $500 billion last year. And that would have made Wall Street pay for its own bailout. It's interesting. This is a great opportunity to renovate the tax system so we tax things we like the least or dislike the most before we tax labor, which means you can reduce taxes on workers' income and increase taxes on corporate crime, pollution, carbon tax, Wall Street speculative transactions, things that we don't like. Increase taxes in order to try to diminish these disliked conditions. And beyond that, shifting power from corporate executives to the shareholders and investors and pension funds that own these companies. We have proposals now before Senator Dodd and Senator Schumer, financial consumer associations that are actually voluntarily joined by consumers with consumer dues of a few dollars a year to have their own watchdogs.
But, Mr. Nader, if I can interrupt, I mean, these are the very people who enabled the Wall Street crash.
Yes. Well, they would be required to put these invitations to join these financial consumer associations around the country in their communication envelopes and other communications, electronic, to their investors. Because they're always communicating to their investors, trying to get them to buy this and support that.
The long journey of Ralph Nader and GM seems to be coming to some kind of conclusion. The fork of the road, as Yogi Berra used to say. When you come to it, you better take it. Could you have imagined, in the early 1960s when you were looking into GM and its Corvair that, some decades later it would be at the edge of collapse?
No, I could never imagine. The biggest auto company in the world, loaded with AAA credit ratings, General Motors credit, General Motors insurance, would now be worth in the stock evaluation about $2 billion and on the ropes, heading for bankruptcy. This is classic bad management. Stagnant management. They suppressed their own engineers and scientists. They were making a lot of money on a SUV spree a few years ago, and they didn't look ahead the way Toyota did and Honda and others. And now they're paying the price, and of course their workers are paying an even bigger price. So I think I was talking to T. Boone Pickens a few months ago. I said, you're a takeover specialist. You want natural gas to power cars. Why don't you take over General Motors? And he said, no, it has too many liabilities. It wouldn't be costly to buy it, but you'd have to take on about $60 billion or more in liabilities. But you know what should have happened, David, is people like Ross Perot and Kohlberg, Kravis, and T. Boone Pickens should have bought General Motors and shaped it up, at least in terms of its technology, because that's what's destroyed General Motors, the product. Very, very, very bad management.
Through the whole history of capitalism, it's been marked by booms and the kinds of busts we're going through now. I can hear a fictive person out there saying, well, we love Ralph Nader. He's done so much. He's so dedicated to the American consumer and bettering life in this country. But basically, he's a tinkerer. He's making cosmetic changes. He wants a little more regulation here, a little tightening of the screws there. What would you say to that person out there?
Well, first of all, I don't usually say I told you so, but I've been telling people so for so many years, and I've been right for so many years, whether it's on auto safety or the financial deregulation collapse. I mean, this is testimony. This is articles. This is statements. This isn't just a whisper in the wind. But unfortunately, in our society, people who are right, who predict right things, that challenge existing power, don't get much media. They don't get much attention. I mean, look who's getting the talk shows. It's the crooks, the radio talk shows. It's either the crooks. Who's getting the jobs in the government? It's the people who caused the problem that they are now being brought into the government to save with taxpayer dollars and bailouts. So I don't know. I'm not a tinkerer at all. I mean, I think we've got to find ways to displace the giant corporation. And at a conference that we held in Washington in June 2007, the entire 2.5 days are on the web. It's tamethecorporation.org, tamethecorporation.org. In my opening address, I said we've got to move in two directions: subordinating the corporate entity to the sovereignty of the people, getting rid of corporate personhood. Corporations should never have equal rights under the Constitution with real human beings, because the corporate entity, not the employees, are not human beings. They can be robots. Why would we give robots equal rights with human beings? Free speech, the right to lobby, the right to engage in politics, the right to support candidates. Corporations should not be allowed to do that. Business Week, by the way, in 2000 had an editorial green saying corporations should get out of politics. Now, having said that, the second is displacement. Let me make it very clear what I mean by that. The way, barring a massive political movement that revolutionizes in a very good way the American economy, that is conducive with the normal ethics and values and traditions of the American people, which is fairness and opportunity. Let me put it this way, David. The more community health clinics there are, focusing on prevention, the weaker the giant health insurance companies like Aetna and the big HMOs and drug companies become. The more we have renewable energy in our areas, wind power, good biomass, geothermal, the weaker Exxon and Peabody coal become because they lose sales. The more we have our food grown near where we live, and don't cart it in from Mexico or cart tomatoes in from Florida or California over the mountains and plains, the weaker the giant food growers and companies, process companies, are going to be. So that's the way we really have to go. Community economics, community self-reliance. It's very much within our grasp. It's not pie in the sky stuff. A lot of it is restoring certain community self-reliances that we had many, many decades ago. In 1948, 80% of the vegetables consumed in Massachusetts were grown in Massachusetts. It's now less than 15%. 15. So, but now truck farming and farming close to metropolitan areas is coming back. And people can make a livelihood on 40 acres of specialized crops.
I was interested to hear you make an analogy about sports and sports fans. And I've heard Chomsky talk about this as well. He's remarked on how incredibly analytical Americans are when it comes to sports. And also, if you listen to these programs, and you do, the tremendous fearlessness of the people calling in. Fire that bum. Yeah. He doesn't deserve to play. Trade him. Why did they draft this player? Why did they do that? That's not translated into the political arena. It's a very interesting phenomenon. Is it uniquely American?
No, it's not. You look at the soccer fans in Europe. I think part of it is once you go through each day thinking you don't matter, you don't have power, you don't count, and the politicians are never going to listen to you. Why should you spend your time learning about politics? Why should you spend your time learning about strategy, campaigns? Now, I think that's a cop-out. As you say, throw the bums out. And they know the history. They've studied the history of the teams, the statistics of the players, the frailties of the managers, the coaches, what strategy should be in the fifth inning, the eighth inning. Should it be a bunt? Should it be a hit and run? Imagine translating that kind of analytic knowledge. It's not just analytic, it's also knowledge to the electoral arena, where they would know what the records were of the people running for governor or senator or mayor, where they would know how to maneuver their own votes and how to develop strategies and tactics. They wouldn't just go for the least worst, or they wouldn't give up on themselves. It's interesting that no matter how bad a losing team is, 90% of the fans stay with the team. It's really quite interesting. They may rag the team, criticize the team, boo the team. They still stay with the team. There's an identification there. It's a respite from the travails of daily life and the agonies of daily life.
You've turned 75 in January. I know it's too early and you're too young to be talking about a Nader legacy, but do talk about it.
Well, we're trying to start new groups that we do from time to time. We'd like to start Congress watchdog groups. I mean, we can't do any but spark plug it, but 1,000 people organized at the Congress watchdog group in each congressional district with $200 dues a year, 2 offices, 3 full-time people, focusing on 2 senators and representatives, bringing them back for auditorium sessions, diffusing their record, organizing new techniques of civic influence over the Congress. We'd love to see that, and it would revolutionize the federal government because Congress is the most powerful branch. It's the taxing branch, the appropriation branch, the supposed declaration of war branch. And if you turn Congress around, 535 men and women who put their shoes on every day like we do, and we're 630,000 people in every congressional district. So 1,000 people organized around major redirections that we have campaigned on. Living wage, single payer, crackdown on corporate crime, ending corporate subsidies, solar energy, organic farming, and getting out of these malicious trade agreements, waging peace, cutting the military budget. All these and others, changing the tax system, have huge support among the American people. Huge support. And so we'd like to do that. But we need these spark plugs in each congressional district, 1 or 2, 3 people, just to get it going. And we can show how it can be done. So it's like Jean Monnet, who was one of the creators of the common market, said, without people, nothing happens. But without institutions, nothing lasts. That's what we've got to do. Also, we want to continue organizing alumni classes, like my Princeton class, that is providing a lot of opportunities for students after they graduate to work in systemic justice in citizen groups across the country, or the Centers for Law and Justice that my law school class at Harvard, starting the Appleseed Foundation, have started in 16 states. There isn't a single citizen group on nanotechnology, portentous technology. There are only 3 little citizen groups on bioengineering. It's not enough. We got to keep developing more and more institutions, and that's what I have been about.
Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Website, citizen.org or essential.org. Stay in touch. My column is on Common Dreams or nader.org.